I'll have to say Miss Debbie knows her McGee's. You did a nice job on yours. I will second what Miss Debbie said. I am not a trained public speaker, and I don't pretend to be. So I taught second grade for 30 years without any time off, so I'm a little bit loony because you had to be loonier than a Bessie bug to stay in there with them little critters. You had to just have that kind of mentality. It is an honor to be here today. I'm sure Anita's going to go like this when it's time for me to hush. I told her that when I spoke at the something over at the Loudon Historical Bunch on the Bacon Farm, I finally figured out that the Bacons down there on Colonel Bacon, Charles H. Bacon Farm, was kin to the Bacon Bunch up here, and some of that bunch married into Barclay McGee. Barclay McGee was married to one of those ladies, their sisters, the Henleys. And one died, and he just turned around and married the sister. So anyway, that was another long story short. Let's see. Is it okay if I stick this map up here? Let me put a plug in for the Von Orr Heritage Museum. She has these maps. If you're looking for maps, I don't know where to put it. Is it okay if I take this down a minute? Well, I don't want to damage it, and this one looks like it might not be attached, and I don't want to do anything to it. Anyway, maps are hard to come by. Am I loud enough? Because if I'm going to be here, you want to hear me. Okay. Well, anyway, I got this down there. It's a 1965 TVA map, but it's a TVA map. And it goes from Chilhowie Dam, and it has the riverbed, but it also has the flow out. And it goes all the way down to the proposed Tellico Dam. And then it has Lenore City. So I've tried to pinpoint a few little things, and feel free to come up and look at that later. But anyway, Miss Edna sells those down there at the Von Orr Heritage Museum, and she's here with us today. So anyway, I have written this book, and it is like I can't believe that I have written a book. My mama should have written this book, and she said, no, you write it. So I'm going to jump right into this because there's no way that you can cram 20 years in 20 minutes. Miss Anita gave me 20 minutes. I said, I can't do it in 20 minutes. Anyway, the Tellico Dam project, as you all know, was long, complicated, overlapping, controversial from the get-go. In fact, Greenback was one of the center spots where Aubrey Wagner came, and the whole bunch of 300, 400, I don't know how many people came and was against it. And then Rose Island had another whole section in there with the Association for the Preservation of the Little Tennessee River, where they met on there to help fight for it. The project was so long it spanned 2 decades, all of the 60s and all of the 70s. It was in newspapers, it was in the local news, it was in national news, it was on again, off again until 66 when President Johnson signed the 67 budget, and then construction started then in March of 67. Is that loud enough? Can y'all hear me? Okie dokie. There were 5 presidents and 6 Tennessee state governors that all had a folder that said Tellico Dam Project on their desk. So we won't go into what each one of those political heads did because we just won't have time. It is in this book. TVA confiscated, and that's what I call it, confiscated. They didn't purchase, they pushed and they bullied. Of course, that's my opinion. 38,000 acres. 38,000 acres, and this 38,000 acres went from Chilhowie down the 33-so-mile stretch all the way down to the mouth of the Little T, right below Fort Loudon. Of that 38,000, 16,000 was going to be reservoir. That meant 22,000 acres were taken extra. Extra? Yeah, beyond the reservoir. Well, come to find out, they couldn't get the funding in Congress because the dam itself didn't have a cost-benefit ratio worth a hoot. And TVA lied and lied and lied. And that is in the Tellico Dam story that Wheeler McDonald, 2 UT professors, wrote from TVA's archives that they were allowed to see. They weren't allowed to see everything. So the dam itself was not there by its own merits, so please know that. Crooked politicians and TVA that lied to get it pushed through because it was a project that Aubrey Wagner was behind all the way around. So reselling the 22,000 extra acres was their way of getting the cost-benefit ratio so they could get their money out of Congress. Across this 38,000 acres and that 33-mile stretch, 692 tracts of land was taken. 58 were condemnations. 348 farm families. that was hog farmers, poultry farmers, dairy farmers, dairy farmers, did I say that? Row crop farmers, truck patch farmers, 348 more or more. The average per acre across the 38,000 was $356 an acre. My book is only one documentation of one farmer, one farm voice. And all those others have never been told, and I dare say a lot of them will not be told, because the dam will be 44 years old, the river will be dead 44 years this November the 29th. And in this span of time, a lot of stuff has been written. And I have the names of the books and who wrote them if you're interested, but I will say the early settlement was documented, and TVA even helped the Carsons, Alberta and whatever his name was, Carson. They talked about the early settlement. Jefferson Chapman is the one that talked about the archaeology that was in this area. I think he might have been one of the ones that did Morganton. Wheeler and McDonald used a little bit, so TVA had their say in their story. Consequences of the Dam was by Riker. I told you I wouldn't tell all that, didn't I? Oh, well. Anyway, and then the Snail Darter has its own story with Zig Plotter, and it goes to the Supreme Court, and it wins there. Let's see. The Endangered Species Act was signed by Nixon December of '73, so that's coming up 50 years this December. And so it was the first landmark case, the Snail Darter, to challenge that law. The dam proponent was Mayor Charles Hall of Tellico Plains. He wanted it worse than Aubrey Wagner did, the dam, and so he's turned all of his papers over, and he's had his book written. The Cherokee have written Corn Mother, Salu Corn Mother, and so they've had some say. Frances Dorward talked about it. She went around and collected stories from people that were willing to tell their story, so she's documented that. So you're going to look at me and you're going to say, what's this old gal? What's this old gal? What's she going to tell me that I don't already know? I've read it all. I've seen it all. I was here. I saw it on television. Grandpa told me this. Uncle told me that. Well, I'd like to think from right here that Paul Harvey, if he were still alive, would say, well, didn't y'all like Paul Harvey? I like Paul Harvey. He'd say, so you think you know it all, huh? You've read it all. Well, have you heard of a farmer named Ben Ritchey and his wife Jean and their 4 kids, Sally and Marianne and Carolyn and Randy? And the listeners going, no, I don't know those people. So Paul Harvey would continue, and this is the story he would hopefully tell. Ben Ritchey owned a 119-acre farm, a row crop farm, on a plateau a quarter of a mile from Jackson Bend on the Loudon side of the river. It was halfway between Loudon, the town of Loudon, and Vonore. And there was a little community there that is now extinct and completely underwater. It was called the Jackson community. Charles H. Bacon's farm was there, Burton Mill, which is a very old mill. It was a grist mill. There were 3 churches. There was a blacksmith shop that turned into a welding shop. There was a little grocery store that was there. And it was a wonderful place to grow up. There was a school that even my daddy had gone to the school and gotten through the 8th grade there. So that's where Ben Ritchey, and that's where I grew up. So in 1969, as I said, in 67 they started the dam. So in 69, we have our very first face-to-face contact with an appraiser. Tom Jester was his name. He came twice that March, and that was he's there for the government. He was going to appraise our farm, take it for the Tellico project. We were miles from the dam. We were on a plateau. We knew our land would never be covered. And Mama and Daddy, I'll have to say, they lived through the Depression, and if you've lived through the Depression, I reckon you'd face a bulldozer that had that was coming straight at you. Nothing fazed them. They had conviction, and they had principles, and by doggies, they stood with them, and they did not go with the crowd. They weren't afraid. They stood right there and said, no, this isn't for sale. Tom Jester came twice that March. Let me tell you, we were not approached for 5 years. 5 years. We watched the news. We saw what was going on. The community started to disappear. Our neighbors disappeared. TVA'd slap a big old number, paint a big old number on the house. They'd bid it off. People would sell their cattle. They left. Bulldozers would go by our house. They were tearing down the creek banks. So in '74, they came back. And so they were going to appraise it, but Tom Jester fails, and they never sent him back. So it was Phillips and Pruitt. Those were the next appraisers, and they always came as a pair. And so Daddy told them the same thing. The place isn't for sale. And when they asked what they wanted for it, Daddy said, well, what do you want for it? It's not going to be underwater. Oh, we just know what they tell us on television, or we just know what we read in the paper. Well, that wasn't an answer at all, was it? No. So on and off through 74, Daddy was telling these appraisers no. Well, we saw them drive up and down the road because you couldn't mistake them. They were the white cars and had that little old tiny emblem on there that said TVA. So anybody that had a white, nobody would buy white cars because those were TVA cars or TVA trucks. You didn't want those. Anyway, 74, December the 13th, we get this lovely present from the TVA, and it is condemnation papers. Isn't that a nice present? And it's also got a declaration of taking that says our land goes immediately into the ownership of the United States government. It's like, huh. So here we are, condemned. The condemnation papers, and that's like a Gilligan's Island 3-hour tour, because that would take a long time to tell what that is, but there's a whole chapter in here because we were condemned, but we also fought it. That meant you had to, in 20 days, 20 days is all they gave you. You had to get an attorney, you had to get an independent appraiser and have your attorney approach their attorney and say, they're not going to take that offer, because the offer they gave us was an appraisal from the road because Daddy wouldn't let them own the property. Anyway, so here we are condemned. It's Christmas. Well, 1975 comes by, the appraisers come back, and they want to appraise the farm. And here we are condemned, and Daddy says, no, you can't come on my farm. And I thought, boy, what strength Daddy had, and Mama. And so in March of that year, they call on the phone and they say, we'll be there tomorrow with federal marshals. So we were appraised by federal marshals coming, and they had rifles. They didn't point them at us, but they had them, they had them across their arms. They made it very sure that you saw them. And their lawyer got out and read something called a writ of assistance, and it said if you interfere with this appraisal in any shape, form, or fashion, you're going to be hauled off. And I don't know how many carloads there were. TVA had appraisers, and they had so-called independent appraisers, and then their appraiser, and their chief appraiser was Beverly Burbage. And so that happened in 75. So in the rest of 75 and part of 76, we start learning all these hoops of what it means to be condemned and how to fight it. But again, that's a long story. I won't go there. So, let me see. I've tried to keep this because I go on so many bird trails, y'all. You won't be able to keep up with me.
There are a lot of these people that remember Richard McCall.
I'm not to them yet, but yes, because they're on this side of the river, and Burl represented Von Orr, and Asa and Nell were over here in, where's Ben? Do any of you all remember Asa and Nell McCall? Okay, a couple of hands here. Asa died Easter Sunday morning, 1977 at home, and then Nell continued to live down there, and Dean and Bill Rader. Do y'all remember Dean and Bill Rader? Dean was there when the Doberman pinchers, he had a Doberman pinscher, and the appraisers came. There's a whole big tale about that too. I think I've got that in the book. Anyway, we were one of the last three holdouts, McCall's, Mosier, and my family. And my home was the last one standing in 38,000 acres. Now, Burl always said his was the last one, but here's how it goes down. Burl's and Mrs. McCall's house was taken down November the 13th. It was a Tuesday. It was the last eviction note that was deadline that was given, and those two families forced TVA to come in with their henchmen, is what I'll call them, and escort them out. Now, they didn't drag them out, and they did. You wouldn't believe the number of people that say, "Oh yeah, I remember that little woman. She was carried out in a rocking chair." That was a movie, and you can't convince these people that she didn't go out of there in a rocking chair. She had one arm looped around Boone Daughtery, her lawyer, and she had one arm looped around her daughter, Margaret Ellen Sexton. And so their house was torn down. They were making a point. Well, we couldn't do that because Burl was a postman, and Mrs. McCall was renting hers to a local boy here, and he was farming her land, and he was using his own equipment. So Daddy had rented the bacon farm and J.C. Hitch, if any of you knew him out of Vonore. His farm was right up from the bacon farm. And so all that was below the 813-foot elevation line, and our crop wasn't ready to get out yet. And so when you're condemned that way and evicted that way, they come in and they take everything you've got, from your panty drawer to your sock drawer to your spoon drawer to your cows to your calves to your tobacco in the barn, and they confiscate it, load it up, and it goes somewhere for 30 days and you have no earthly idea where it is. So Daddy said, they're not getting my equipment. He was a John Deere man and he liked his John Deere equipment and he wasn't going to have nobody touching it. So we moved ourselves, and our house was not torn down until November the 27th. So our house was the last house standing. My book is, I feel, one of the missing pieces in the whole Tellico story. The farmer had not until this time been represented. And it is documented, and so I stand before you today as one of the last 3 living, walking, breathing people that survived the 2-decade Tellico ordeal. My sister is one of them, and my brother is the other one. We are the only 3 people that lived on the land until the bitter end for the whole 20 years. I was 6 years old when it started. I was 24 when I had to walk off. It's still very emotional to me, and I said I wasn't going to cry, so we're not going to cry. Let's see. It's a window into the very epicenter of the project. It's an inside, like you're inside the tornado, and you're looking out, where all these other books were written from people who came in. They didn't live here. This wasn't their history. This wasn't their place. So Mom and Daddy raised us as a row crop farmer. Now that's not saying that that's any different than any farmer, but I mean, you didn't have a milk check. Of course, milk checks depended on from your dairies. All farmers have a hard time with the ins and outs of the weather and the prices. So if Paul Harvey were here, I would like to think that he'd say, well, this is the rest of the story. I grew up personally witnessing every bit of the destruction. It's the wonder I don't have PTSD. I guess that's how I could be goofy at school. It was a release. I watched my community disappear. I watched churches be dug up. Fort Creek Baptist Church was dug up, and I drove around dirt clods in the road that I wondered who in the Sam Hill, what pieces and parts they belonged to. I watched the bacon farms sell their cattle. Everything around me was in chaos, but our chaos, those 20 years, turned into normal. So our chaos was normal, which sounds crazy. We tried to move on and make our milestones. We went to school. First time I ever got a watch. Just all the little things that you do when you make milestones. So during our battle, as you would in any battle, you want to find out about your enemy. So you track them out. I mean, if you're going to get in a fight with somebody, you want to know if they're a lefty or if they're a righty, don't you? And you want to know if they can kick or raise their leg or lay down or whatever they're going to do. So we started documenting everything. Mama had grown up in the milling company, grist mill. They made it was Pond Creek Mill, and she was moved from the Watts Bar project. And by the way, Loudoun County has 3 dams and 4 reservoirs. Are y'all aware of that? And Loudoun County, 14% of Loudoun County is owned or controlled by TVA. That's a lot, isn't it? That's according to their own records. Anyway, we started documenting. If Mama would say, if you see them out at Ab Giles's place, grab whatever's in the floor of the truck and write down how many there are, what the time is, what side of the truck they're on, and what they're doing, and if you've ever seen them before. So we have scraps of paper that have all this information. We have farm records. I kept a journal for 1 solid year. That's where I get a lot of what we ate and what's going on in the garden and what's going up and down the creek. So that's a lot of the personal things. Mama, thankfully, she kept the records for her daddy at the mill, and she was immaculate. She dated everything. She marked where it came from. So I have all of her records. I didn't have to go anywhere for all this documentation back here. I've got it at home. She kept a rough draft, and all her stuff's in pencil. If she was going to write, Miss Donna, she would write a rough draft, get it all the way she wanted, and then she kept the draft. Then if somebody wrote her back, she had that. So I have what she wrote and their response. For every politician, every lawyer, every newspaper, every magazine, whoever it is that she wrote. She lobbied in Washington in the oversight hearings for endangered species twice, 77 and 78. She lobbied in Washington 6 times. My sister and I lobbied twice. Can you beat that? There we were. Boomfuzzle was like the hillbillies go to Washington, D.C. We have all the legal documents that from our lawyers and from TVA. We collected maps. We went through that 3-man commission hearing, and it was a 4-piled transcript, and it's all lawyer jargon, so I've got that. I've got the endangered species hearing transcripts for everybody that spoke, from the Cherokee to the TVA to the whoever's. I've got the 96 congressional record. I've got the alternatives for the Tellico Dam project that was written by the United States Interior and TVA that says it was better a dry dam and it was more economical to leave it as a river. I have newspapers from coast to coast, magazines, even scholastic news for kids. I have personal photos. I have notes from lobbying trips. Mama was also part of the dispossessed landowners when we thought we were going to get our land back, and she was the secretary. So I have all those notes. And someone had told me one time, if you have a story, and I'm going to tell you this because it spurred me, if you want it told the way it truly happened, and you were there and you witnessed it, by George, you better be the one to tell it. You better be the one to get it down, or it's going to get lost. Your papers will go here, there, and yonder. The story will die. So once I retired from teaching and had a little time, because if there's any teachers in here, it consumes your life. I can't imagine what it does now. Hallelujah, I'm retired. Anyway, I started going at Mama, and I said, Mama, you need to write this story, because all in this book are her letters that she has written. And I've cried, I've laughed, I've hooted, I fell into states of depression. I knew my mama was smart, but I did not know how intelligent she was until I read her material. And I was just, the way she words things and the way she puts it, she can tell you off without saying one naughty word. And I just don't know. I think TVA knew she was an opponent for sure. So I came at Mama. And see, Mama was never my friend. Mama was always Mama. And she was going to tell me what for, and there was no convincing her of anything. Y'all ever have a mama like that? She was Mama to the end. How am I doing, Anita? Have I got a little bit more time? So anyway, she says, you write the story. And I said, Mama, see the dog run? By the end of the year, the dog might be on the tailgate of the truck. I said, I can't write. And my language skills and grammatical skills, forget that. I say, I had my weekend language and the language I had to use at school to be, not thrown out of the school. So anyway, I could see she was done with it. And so I thought, well, I'll take all that stuff home and I'll get it organized and she'll get interested, like I thought I knew something. So I pulled out filing cabinet drawers, bags, paper bags, split. I even found some stuff right before I wrote the book, and I thought, gee whiz, that was a major piece. Why didn't I have that before? Anyway, I got all that together and I made timelines. This is the one for the condemnation hearing that we went through. This is the TVA in the Tennessee River, and it's the dated, and this is after I've read everything that we collected. And then this one I named Fort Creek, and this is what we're doing on the farm and what Daddy's putting out and what corn's going and what gas is and what we had for supper and if the signs are right and we're out putting a garden. So I got all that, but it took a year. By the time I got all that stuff, I had to line it all out, then I had to sit down and read it all. And that's when I discovered how smart my mama really was. She died in 2010, and so by the time I had all this pulled together, Marianne and Sally were in the front seat. Our other sister passed away in 2015, and she did the driving, and I was in the back seat with Mama. I said, Mama, I had these, and I showed them to her, and I said, Mama, look at this. Mama, I said, look. I said, you knew TVA inside, outside. You knew TVA better than TVA knew TVA. And I said, I laughed, and I've cried, and I've been mad, and I fell into states of despair. When I was writing this and getting it out on the table, it would growl at me when I know you think I'm nutty. Growl at me when I walked by it on the end of the table, and I'd say, well, I can't deal with you today, because it would be like I didn't have my heart right to attack it. And there are days I'd write one sentence, and there was more I erased than it's a miracle it's even written. But anyway, I said, Mama, I have this little old piece of paper that says I can teach school. I got this little certificate, but you have a PhD in TVA. You knew them, and you were a viable opponent. And they couldn't stand her, just like they couldn't stand Miss Alice Melton, who was very instrumental in saving Fort Loudon in the early years. And so we knew Miss Melton, and she came up and helped fight. So this book is not from my memory. Do I remember it all? Yeah, I do, because I've walked around with this. This is just my life. I never had children, and this is my baby. And so when I let it go and I let it be released, it was like, oh heavens, you know, I guess when a mother has a baby, she must go, oh, please don't tell me my baby's ugly. And so I thought, oh, you want everybody to think your baby, I guess, looks okay. And this is how this was, because this is how I grew up. And so it's honest, it's detailed, and it's a true story from a farmer's standpoint. And I'd like to think now that the farmer has a part of his story, at least one farmer has a representation for the whole Tellico project. It's the only publication I know of, and it will be the only one of the last 3 families that lived through the very end, because Burrell and the McCalls have no living heirs. None. They're gone. So up until now, the farmer has been sort of silent, and I had a lot of stumbling blocks. That's why I've got this little thing that's like a wart on the end of my nose. I had so many doors slam, it was like wham! And I thought, oh, golly. Anyway, the reader gets an unwavering taste of what it was like to fight for your property, your livelihood, your home, and your community. And if I may, I thought, how am I doing, Anita? I don't want to, I know y'all are getting tired. You probably need to stand up and stretch your legs. This little section here, it won't take me much. Mama is writing Mr. Senator Brock, Bill Brock, and y'all remember him? He was originally from Chattanooga. Well, Mama wrote him in a quest to get help, and Senator Brock, we didn't know it, sends her letter to Aubrey Wagner to answer, and then Aubrey Wagner writes back to Senator Brock, and then Senator Brock writes back to Mama and sends Aubrey Wagner's letter. So in that one, she says, she's writing Brock back, and she's saying, from your reply to me and your enclosed letter from the chief mogul, known to you as Red, I have come to these conclusions. 1, you think your hands are tied and you're unwilling to help us. 2, you've fallen victim to TVA's methods of Congress brainwashing tactics. 3, you're admitting TVA is greater and has more power than the federal government. 4, you're deaf and blind to a citizen's plea for help, one who is in danger of becoming a victim of an organization that considers this area their own private playpen to manipulate as it desires. As I view the unbridled tactics of the TVA under the strict regimentation and supervision of its chairman, I can very well see a strong resemblance to another strong chairman, Mao of China, who is a master plan for a whole nation with its vast numbers of bland humanity who sit by mutely while you and others like you sit by meekly, failing to see the forest for the trees. TVA goes on methodically cutting up the citizens of this area for fish bait for its pools. So that's like a sample of the kind of stuff she wrote. And I would just cackle. I thought, good golly, Ned, Mama, boy, you could write. And then Anita's not told me to shut up. Here's another one. She's writing here, Congressman Duncan. The only political head that was in favor of saving the area was Winfield Dunn. And Aubrey Wagner chewed him up and spit him out through letters in the newspaper. It was a sad thing. So here she's writing Congressman Duncan, and she says, my family, all registered voters, are waiting and watching carefully the outcome of the clash between the Interior Department and TVA over the Endangered Species Act and the snail darter. Is there really a double standard of law in this country? One to be defied by certain elements and obeyed by others? Which Constitution did you promise to obey and uphold when you became a congressman? Was it the modern version that stretches to cover everything like an 18-hour girdle? The one that misuses the right of eminent domain so flagrantly and allows federal judges to replace 12-man juries trials with a 3-man commission, or that rock-ribbed version that stood as a cornerstone of our once great republic, the one signed by Jefferson and Hancock and Franklin and other great patriots. So those are just a few of her writings, and without Mama, I couldn't have written the book. So even though she is gone, she was right there with me writing this book, and so was Daddy. So I want to thank you all. I know you're tired of sitting there, and I have brought some posters. Feel free to look at the map, and then I do have some books to sell. It is on Amazon, and believe it or not, I can't tell who's buying the books on Amazon, but I can go in and see how many sold, and it's not been out. It'll be 10 months this month that it's been out available, and it's sold 737 books. And I thought, that's not too bad for an old self-published country girl, because anyway, thumb through here. It's pictures of our farm, our house, some river views. I know TVA thought we were dumbbells because this is my house that I grew up in. We didn't have a bathroom till I was freshman in high school, and TVA, of course, then they were from Knoxville. They're lawyers and they're head honchos, and they would come down and not touch anything. Like they were afraid that they'd catch something from us. And I know they thought we were dumb. They just thought we were dumb farmers. And let me tell you, farmers are some of the smartest people in this world. Thank you for your time and attention.